We're going over system concepts. Article 43, disclosing a portion, covering 2. Part 1. Kabbalists go through great internal scrutiny before they disclose anything through speech or writing to others. This is because either there is no desire for the knowledge disclosed, the issue cannot be explained clearly, or because it can cause harm if disclosed. And here's a quote. There is an idiom among great sages. When they come to disclose a profound matter, they begin their words with, I am disclosing a portion and covering 2 portions. Our sages took great care not to utter words needlessly. As our sages instructed, a word is a rock, silence is 2. This means that if you have a priceless word whose worth is 1 rock, know that not saying it is worth 2 rocks. This refers to those uttering needless words without pertinent content or use, except to decorate the tongue in the eyes of the beholders. This was strictly forbidden in the eyes of our sages, as it is known to those who examine their words. Hence we must be attentive to understand this common idiom of theirs. From the article Disclosing a Portion Covering 2 by Bala Sulam. Kabbalah is the most potent method for developing internal strength through alignment with the system. It contains immense power that, if correctly attained by an individual, can provide great pleasure and control over oneself and managing their situation. Precisely because of the control it can provide for a person, Kabbalah was hidden from the masses to prevent people from using this power for the lower desires of the still, sex, vegetative money, and animal honor degrees. And here's a quote. 3 kinds of concealment of the wisdom. There are 3 parts to the secrets of the Torah. Each part has its own reason for being concealed. They are called by the following names. Number 1, unnecessary. Number 2, impossible. And number 3, the counsel of the Lord is with them that fear him. There is not a single fraction of this wisdom where scrutinies of these 3 parts do not apply. And I will clarify them one at a time. From the article Disclosing a Portion Covering 2 by Bala Sulam. Every concept in Kabbalah has multiple layers of understanding and depth. The wisdom of Kabbalah is purposely encoded so that different people in different phases of development will understand the words in their corresponding contexts. This allows them to disseminate the wisdom without fear of people understanding above their degree of development. Kabbalists wrote down their spiritual development of their matured perception, but allowed people to think it's talking about the creation of reality. They wrote the wisdom as if it's talking about something that happened in our history before we were born. The secret is that Kabbalah never talks about our past, external wisdom. Rather, it only talks about our future, internal wisdom. To know what happened in the past, before reality was created, has no effect on our life today. Since Kabbalists also wrote as though they were talking about others, but they were talking about themselves. They understand how human behavior works, so they were able to precisely encode all the wisdom to go right over the heads of those who did not have the required development and maturity of their ego. And here's a quote. 3/3 in the concealment of wisdom. There are 3/3 in the concealment of the wisdom of truth. The first is the unnecessary, the second is the impossible, and the third is the glory of God is in the concealment of a matter. I will clarify them one at a time. The first third, unnecessary. This part has no loss in it at all, of course, except for the matter of cleanness of the mind. Since we find that triviality is the most harmful saboteur, all the destructors of the world are triviality people, meaning contemplate trivial matters and announce trivial announcements. This is why we do not accept a disciple before he is sworn to remove himself from these saboteurs. From the article, The Quality of the Wisdom of the Hidden in General by Bala Sulam. There are many that fall on this issue. They love to learn trivial parts of the wisdom without it having any relationship with their own development. The idea is to study Kabbalah with clarity of what is unnecessary reality versus necessary perception. Students erroneously want to learn the intentions of the Ari, learn about astrology, or deal extensively with numerical values, gematria. They might want to know who they were in their previous reincarnation. These disciples are considered external to the wisdom of Kabbalah, since they have no desire to become responsible as the creator. Therefore, they cannot advance to phase 3 of the spiritual advancement. Anyone who does not care about their personal development, matured perception, is stuck in the unnecessary phase. And here's a quote. Second third, impossible. This part, of course, requires no oath. However, because it is possible to disclose it by mistaken words and to take pride in it in the eyes of the masses, it is included in the oath as well. From the article The Quality of the Wisdom of Hidden General by Bala Sulam. The wisdom of Kabbalah is about developing our perception to be aligned with our future state. We should understand that when Kabbalists wrote as though they were talking about the past, impossible, they were actually talking about our future, possible. The concepts Kabbalists teach us must be applied and internalized so that we can correct and develop our perception to equalize with our future state. And here's a quote. Third, the glory of God is in the concealment of a matter. This part is the gravest in the concealment, for it has caused many casualties. Know that all the sorcerers that ever were and all the cunning ones come only from such disclosures. Where immature disciples erred in the matters and went out to teach anyone they came across, without considering if they were fit for it. They went out and used the wisdom for human purposes, for lust and honor, and they have taken the sanctities of the Lord to secularism and to the street. This is what is called practical Kabbalah. It's from the article The Quality of the Wisdom of in General by Bala Sulam. Practical Kabbalah refers to when someone thinks the wisdom is about applying the concepts to other people instead of for self-development. When students try to change other people in reality, they are missing the entire purpose of the study and ultimately harming themselves by slowing their growth. Kabbalah is about developing our own perception. There is nothing that needs to change in reality, since reality is an after effect of our internal state. We use reality to make discernments about our internal state. Our focus must be on changing ourselves by changing our perception. As we grow and mature our own perception, our externality changes to reflect our internality. Only a true Kabbalist that is able to pass all these degrees of concealment is allowed to use their power of perception for advancing people to be independent and mature. A sign of such a person is if they are able to teach people to be independent while still being in the society reality. Kabbalists must be able to harness their internal power correctly in order to influence others to advance. And here's the first workshop question. How do we help each other to avoid falling into these three concealments? Mary.
We keep the, concealments in mind. We keep the goal in mind, constantly realizing that we are to be developing our perception, and that this method is about our future, not our past, and that it's about us and not others. Just keeping that at the forefront of our minds and sharing it with each other throughout the day.
Mark.
That's exactly what Mary just said. Only by talking amongst ourselves and reminding ourselves of that there are concealments and keeping the goal in mind. So that's all we can do. Thank you.
Rick.
Absolutely. We have to understand and be aware that every time we read an article by one of the sages, that this process is going on. And if we find or see someone that is, in the group and they're not using the technique properly, what we need to do is, speak up, help them out, show them what's going on, show them how to get into a little bit more depth by seeing the unnecessary, seeing the future rather than the past, etc.
Well, first, to stop falling into the concealments, you need to know the three concealments and be aware of them and constantly have them in your mind. That when you're looking at any kind of material, to understand that it's not talking about reality, it's talking about our perception, it's not talking about our past, it's talking about our future. And it's not talking about anybody else, it's talking about the person who's attaining. So, when you see something that sounds like bad is happening to somebody else, the person who wrote it attained it, so they attained it on themselves. They're not writing about somebody else, they're writing about themselves. It states that they went through. They might have seen it in somebody else, but it states that they have actually attained and gone through themselves. And it's really important to remember that they're not writing about things happening outside of them. They're talking about processes happening within them. The second question, why should we respect even those who fall into one of these concealments? Mary.
Because that's also part of the process. Because we kind of rise and fall, and gradually build up our strength to fall a little less, and that's why we work on this together, so that we can pull each other back up when they fall. So, and also so they don't fall too far. It's kind of part of the learning process.
Mark.
Exactly. It's a remarkable teaching or educational thing to fall into one of these concealments, realize it either by yourself or with the help of your environment, your group, the people that are with you. But it's the only way that we can learn. We can't practice. We can't use this unless we're able to learn it. And falling into concealment and knowing that you're there and moving out of it is a tremendous teaching aid. Thank you.
Rick.
Many times we fall into these states of concealment and don't even realize what we're dealing with. We are not aware because we have not the separation in ourselves. We're not matured to that point. So we need the group, the individuals in the group, to see how we're reacting and what's going on and help us see that we're in that state. So it's very important.
One of the reasons that we should respect those that fall into one of these concealments is because then you can actually learn about it. If you don't respect someone who's fallen into them, you can't learn from them. So the respect you have towards them is that if they're falling into a concealment, you can learn how to make sure that you don't fall into the concealment yourself. So one of the advantages of being in a group with many people going through different phases, maybe some fall into a shell, maybe some people fall into different concealments and have daily concepts, it allows you an opportunity so you can absorb what they're going through so you don't have to go through yourself. You're learning what not to do when people fall, and you learn what to do when people rise. The third question: why should we always relate the wisdom to our future and not our past? Mary.
Because we need to, focus on the future to pull ourselves toward our future state. It doesn't serve us to relate to the past. There are phases that we go through and states that we go through. It's a process of development. So other than reflecting on the past to learn from it, that's okay. But the wisdom is about processes that you go through and phases. And if you focus too much on the past, you'll fall off of that, that goal. And you could, depending on your past, you could end up wallowing there for a while. So it's important to always focus on the future.
Mark.
Yes, the future is the only way that you can stay in a dynamic state of movement. If you don't look to the future and you look to the past, then you can either plateau or fall into a shell, and the past is impossible. There's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can change in the past. I can use it for reference, or I can use it for a guidepost and say, well, I did that wrong, or I learned this, but there's nothing in the past that I can use. It's only the future and the goal that will move me forward. Thank you.
Rick.
It's exactly what it is that the past is only, something to reflect upon, to see what had happened, to see what we can change to move forward. But if you do not have your mind on advancement, if your goal is not advancement, then you have lost the goal. You have then put yourself into a shell or plateaued. So the only thing that one can do is keep focused upon your goal and advancement of internal power.
Another thing I would say is that, let's say, for example, someone has crossed a barrier, and then let's say, we're going over the phases before the barrier. So then the person could say, well, I don't care about these phases. I already crossed the barrier. Why do I need to learn about these phases before the barrier? The idea is to understand that these phases, every phase you go through, they layer on top of each other. So even though it would seem like you only have to focus on the phases after the barrier, if you're already crossed. But the idea is that the phases before the barrier are still living within you. And the more you learn about them, you're going to sort of expand in them and actually sort of be better at them. Just like, for example, just because someone's advancing spiritually doesn't mean they don't have to take care of their food, sex, family, money, honor, and knowledge. And it doesn't mean that, oh, I'm advancing, so I don't need to learn anything more about money, or I don't need to learn any more knowledge, or I don't need to, care about if people honor me or not. No, you have to take care of those as well, and you have to expand on those as well. And the same goes with the connection and all the other phases until the barrier. So everything you learn at any phase, about any phase, will help you for your state, because all the phases are added one on top of each other. There's a diagram that we many times went over when we were going over Talmud Sefirot, and I made one for this session. So what we have here is the 3 rules for interpretation of Kabbalah, which is what we went over. So we've got unnecessary, impossible, and secrets. Unnecessary is when we're reading something. It could be the Zohar, it could be the Torah, it could be the Talmud, it could be the Ari, Baal HaSulam, whatever you want, any Kabbalistic material. And if you're reading it as something that it's talking about reality, it's talking about some kind of code of law, or it's talking about, look what happened to this person, or the donkey, and you've got the master and the slave, and all these different stories. It is to understand they're never talking about reality. Rather, they're talking about perception. And that makes it necessary to you. It also makes sense because if you've got some Kabbalist who's in some solitude, how is he writing about all different things that you do with, code of law of like, you do this with your animal and all different stuff? If he's in solitude, he's not around people, he's not experiencing life. So how can you say he's talking about reality if he's not in reality? He's locked in some room and he's basically by himself. So what possible reality is he describing? Rather, he's describing his own perception, and he's writing it in the language of the branches. That means it looks like he's saying words like love and hate and heart and body, and this goes here, and he went there, and he came back. Looks like he's talking about reality, but actually he's talking in the roots. So it looks like he's talking in the branches, but he's actually using the language of the branches to point at the roots, which is perception. And that makes it necessary for the person that he's actually reading it about advancement that he's going to do in his perception. The second concealment, which is the rule, is to go from impossible, which is thinking about the past, to being possible, to talking about the future. There are so many different societies that learn Kabbalah that they think, oh, we already went through the breaking of the vessels, even though a person was just born in this world. Like, oh yeah, they start dealing with previous reincarnations, and they start saying, oh, you know why things are happening to you right now? Because something you did in the past. Or, why you can't connect with people? Oh, because it's breaking the vessels that happened millions of years ago. And look what happened to Abraham. And they're constantly dealing with history. And the idea is that history, it's good to learn about history, but history won't actually move you to the future. Learning about the future will get you to the future. Having a vision. And that's what Kabbalah does. It shows you the states that previous Kabbalists have gone through, and they wrote it down. So by you actually reading it and understanding these are states you're going to go through, you can better align yourself to them and actually go through them faster. And we've definitely seen here in System Concepts that the more material that has been given about future states to go through, people have gone through them so much faster than someone who didn't have the material, which went through them so much slower. And then finally, we have secrets. When we read in the Zohar, or we read all different things about it, let's say a creature, or we think it's talking about other people, those wicked people, those good people, those righteous people, and we think it's talking about people. What we don't understand is that it's actually talking about ourselves. We disclose the wisdom when we understand that everything they're talking about is about the person who's attaining. So the person who's writing the attainment, when the person's reading that attainment, they have to apply it to themselves. So when they're talking about that, we went over with unformed chaos, darkness, and spirit, where, first you go through suffocation, and then you go through stoning, and then you go through, fire going down your throat, and then finally you're beheaded. So it would seem like, when you're reading that part in the Zohar, in the first commandment, it would seem like it's talking about other people, like those that sin, these are what they go through. And it's like, but the person who wrote it from attainment. So they're actually saying that they went through those phases of suffocation, of stoning, of fire and beheading. So that means there actually are states of advancement. That first you go through and they're informed, and you feel suffocated, means you don't feel the air. And then you go through chaos, which is that stoning where you got all these discernments being bombarded into you and you have to start organizing them. And then you've got that darkness, which is that fire, that burning sensation of wanting to advance but feeling the lack, feeling where you are instead of where you should be. And then finally, with spirit, where you're beheaded, which means that you feel that you have no head, that you don't have the calculation of the next degree. And then when you move in the next degree, then you get the calculation of the next degree. So this is just one of the examples that we give of the secrets where it looks like something that, if someone reading it, they would never want to go through that. But actually, it's talking about the states of advancement. And that's one of the ways that the Kabbalists concealed the material. What do you think of the article?
I thought it was a great article. I'll tell you what, I've always had a problem incorporating all of this. I've read different articles and stuff, but as this last rewriting has made it as clear and given me as much clarity in it all as I've ever had. Great job.
Thanks. Mark, what do you think?
Well, like Rick just said, this isn't really new information or new material. We've heard this before, but the clarity this time is tremendous. I mean, it's very clear, it's very concise, it's understandable, and it's useful if I can just remember to pay attention. So I'm very impressed.
What do you think, Mary?
Well, I think it's, as many times as we've been over this, it's such a foundation for studying that, it's nice to be able to go through it again as its own topic because it's just fundamental to the whole process. And we do need to constantly keep it at the forefront of our minds and also remind each other throughout the day. Because our tendency is to drift out of these concealments. So that's why it takes a group. But I thought it was good.
We haven't actually talked about this for quite a long time. The last time we referred to it was when we went over it in Talmud Sefirot, which was many months ago. So I think it's good to have a refresher on it. And I think also what has helped us is that we've actually felt it. We've felt these concealments, and we felt that when you reveal them, they make so much sense. And they make so much sense that when you go back, you're like, why did I ever think it was like that? Like, why did I ever think it was talking about reality? It didn't make sense at all. And if someone would want to know like a few more secrets. So for example, in the Zohar, it talks about in the Lock and the Key, it talks about how if the person is rewarded, he gets all the lights. And if the person is not rewarded, the angel of death comes and activates his point, his lock point, and all the lights dissipate. So when someone's reading this, he would be like, I definitely wouldn't want to be, I want to be in the state of being rewarded. I wouldn't want to be in the state of, feeling the lock. But actually what it's talking there, it's saying those that aren't meant to advance, they get rewarded with all the lights. They feel great. They feel good. And those that are meant to advance actually get the locked point, which is actually the point in the heart. And then they actually advance. And they go from being angels to being humans to being souls. So it's just another example of where they do this thing where they know how emotionally a person will react. And therefore they sort of transcribe it that way so that the people that shouldn't advance will interpret it as something bad, and those that want to use it as material for advancement will realize that it's actually talking about something good and not something bad. We've also seen how so many people that learn Kabbalah, they either try to use it as reasons for the code of law. It's like, oh, you know why you should keep Shabbos? Because it says over here that this happens. Oh, you know why, you know what happens on Rosh Hashanah? This happens, and look, the Ari says so it must be true. And they just basically take everything that's written in Kabbalah and basically materialize it and corporalize it and sort of make it as it's giving reasons for why you should do things with your hands and legs, instead of understanding that it's talking about states of perception. That since people are so used to corporeality, the encoding worked as a concealment, that no one would think in their right mind, oh, they might be talking about something a little higher than just what you should do with your hands and legs. What have you all thought about, like, how we've slowly, revealed some secrets, like in the Zohar and stuff, and brought them to the forefront? What have you thought about that process?
I like it. I like how you brought out different aspects of readings in the Zohar, started relating it back to the material we're working with and how it interrelates. Because I see that as a basic fundamental of the wisdom, is that relationship between those different readings.
One of the things I like is that when we talk about like a new sort of way to look at things, and then we read the original Zohar material without an explanation, it just makes sense. It's not that I constantly have to, give an explanation on everything. We've got to the point where many times we can read Zohar excerpts and understand what they mean. But then we also understand how normal people would interpret it, and we're like, they would think of it something totally the opposite. So it shows the concealment is not that the books are locked and hidden away and, oh, we've got to find the cave of wonders. But rather, the books are everywhere and everyone has access to them, but no one can read them. That is, they can read the words, but they don't understand the context. They don't understand what it's referring to. It's like we've given the example of someone says, you're reading, material that says that he has a broken heart or he has pain in his heart. So someone in the medical profession would be reading and saying, oh, he had a heart problem. He probably went to the doctor. Somebody else might say, oh, he's got pain in his heart. Oh, yeah, because, his girlfriend left him. So, of course, he's got pain in his heart. So each person will ascribe a different context to the same words, right? And we went over it also in one of the articles about time, how with saying, the word time, there are multiple definitions of time depending on the context you're using. So in Kabbalah, one of the most important things is to collect vessels, is to collect different context points. So when you're reading material, you sort of try to take different contexts and apply it and see which works best, that will actually open up the text and will give you a new insights on it, how to advance and move forward.
Yeah, it seems like it's not only dual processing, it's, there's probably a technical word for it, like triple processing, quadruple processing. I don't know what those terms are, but processing on, thank you, multi-core, processing on several levels at once, and knowing which one to apply to certain situations, or working with different people. But there's a lot of depth.
Exactly. We've seen how when you're saying something, I definitely do this, where when I'm talking to someone in humanity, for example, I will say things that I know how they'll interpret it, and then I'll know that I actually meant a totally different interpretation. I actually get enjoyment from the concealment. Kabbalists, You know, one of the questions could be like, where did they get all that sort of energy to be able to conceal the information? The thing is, they actually enjoy doing the concealment. They enjoy talking to thousands of people and no one understanding what they're talking about. That is, everyone thought they understood what they're talking about, but they actually got enjoyment from allowing everyone to think what they want to think, but them knowing that they're actually talking about something very high in perception and very, you know, deep states. And then only those who were ready to understand it would understand it. So you would have 1,000 people, maybe a few in the room actually understood what the Kabbalist was talking about. So instead of having to filter out the people, he just would use the language in a way that he would know which phase, how they'll interpret what he's saying, and what vessel, what context they'll be applying it to.
Well, in reading these different portions, some of the sources, and Zohar in particular, it's apparent, or it's become apparent, that it's only through maturing our perception or working with our perception and refining it and reaching a certain maturity level, then when you read these sections or these sources in the Zohar, you can understand it. You understand it on a different level. So it shows the space, the distance that's been covered, and that's pretty amazing too.
I agree. One thing that is nice is that it's a process. So it's not like you reach Him and then suddenly you read all the Zohar and you understand it all. You slowly, more and more portions start to open to the person. And it's sort of like a way to know like how much you've advanced or how much you've expanded because of the more portions that actually open up to you and you can actually understand them. And you reach a new degree and you read a portion that you thought you read before and understood or misunderstood. And then you read it and you're like, wait a second, did it just say what I think it said? It's like the entire time I didn't understand it because it's only got a new vessel that when you applied it to that context, it suddenly made sense to that material. And this is a part series article. And what it's basically going to go over is go over more deeply into these rules and sort of the regulations and how they did the concealments and who's allowed to say what and so forth. And we'll see them in the future parts of this series of the article.
This makes me curious about, it's been talked about before. I remember in BB, this was mentioned numerous times in the EC as we were coming along. Go ahead and read the Zohar if you want. You won't understand any of it, but just simply by reading it, by exposing yourself to it, there's a benefit. And I'm curious about how you feel about that, because back then I didn't have the maturity. My perceptions weren't mature enough to understand a thing. Did it have any effect on me when I was reading it in concealment? I don't know.
So I can tell you from personal experience that before I went into Bala Salam, I was reading the Zohar and corporalizing it. It's like, do you know, Mark? You know where the other side is? The shells? They're in the depth of the sea. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's the way I interpret it. Like physical, like, the bad forces are in the depths of the sea. If you took a ship there, you might be able to see them. When I went into the Bala Salam method, that immediately shut that whole off. And I stopped corporalizing it. But then I also understood I couldn't understand it. So I avoided the Zohar. And only relatively lately, actually, I've started to use it more and more as a reference. In the last few months, we've seen that. Beforehand, I didn't hardly ever touch it. I had a few maybe articles on it, and that was it. And on the easy parts. And it's only lately I've become more comfortable and finding more and more, getting more vessels to actually apply to understand more Zohar portions. But like when they say, oh, if you read it, it comes again into the idea of like the surrounding life. We've seen people reading the Zohar for centuries and it's not helped them at all. So it's just a way for them to allow people to like read it, but never actually understand it at all. And there's just no growth there at all. So they get inspired by it. They're like, oh, we're reading a secret book with magical powers. And that gives them, a certain high and they feel great about it, but that's it. It doesn't actually give them any advancement whatsoever. You can read the Zohar from back to forth many times and you will get no advancement from that, as we're saying. But it's very tempting to think that way. To think that, oh, by just reading it, by scanning the Zohar, I will advance. It's like...
Yes, because it's painless, and nobody wants to hurt. Nobody wants to look at themselves and, their internality and their thought processes and, what they're made of. It's very painful to look within, it can be. And it's a lot easier to think that, if you just scan something, you'll advance. It's, not, it's a difficult work to do it the right way.
Exactly. We've seen that, not everyone wants to advance, and it's totally okay. It is hard work to, be aware of your own emotions and thoughts and processes and understand how you interact with life and understand it. And not everyone's ready for it, and those which already come, and those which aren't ready, they leave, and that's totally fine. We don't force anyone to advance. There's no impeding destruction. I think we'll stop here and enter the after party.